Hi, in this video we're going to look at the basics of compression. So I'm going to go over the basic parameters that you'll find on most compressors, how they work and how they affect the audio signal. So firstly we'll look at what does a compressor actually do. A compressor changes the dynamic range between the loudest and quietest parts of an audio signal. Generally we have a few parameters you'll find on most compressors. We have threshold, which is how loud the signal has to be before compression takes place. Ratio, how much compression is applied. For example, if we have a ratio of 2:1, anything that exceeds the signal, half of that will get removed by the compressor. If you have a ratio of 4:1, 3/4 will get removed. So for every 4 dB that exceed the threshold, 3 dB will be removed. Next we have attack, which is how long it takes the compressor to achieve its full amount of gain reduction. So it's not how long it takes the compressor to start compressing, it's how long it takes to achieve the full amount of compression. Then we have release, which is how soon after the signal goes below the threshold, the compressor stops. However, from compressor to compressor, the attack and release envelopes vary quite a lot. Next we have knee, which sets how the compressor reacts to the signal once the threshold is passed. Hard knee settings mean it clamps the signal straight away, and soft knee means the compressor kicks in more gently as the signal goes further past the threshold. Next we have make-up gain, which allows you to compensate for the gain reduction taking place to bring the signal back up to a similar level so you can compare before and after. So now we're going to have a look at these parameters and how they affect the audio signal. I'm going to use Fabfilter Pro C2 because it's got a good visual representation of what happens inside the compressor. We're going to test out some of these parameters on the snare drum. If I use a ratio of 1:1, no matter what the threshold is set to, no compression will take place unless I increase the threshold. So we're going to start off with a very fast attack and release and see how that sounds on this snare drum. With the fastest attack and release time, you can hear it's choked the snare drum, it's made it sound quite muffled, because what it's done is it's compressed almost straight away, taking out the transient and softening the snare drum. By increasing the attack we can let some of the transient through, and what will happen is the signal will compress the signal after the transient, making a contrast between the transient and the rest of the snare drum, making it sound more snappy and punchy. By using too fast attack times, you can make a mix sound very lifeless and you can sacrifice a lot of the attack and impact. Whereas by using a slower attack time, you're letting that transient through, it sounds a lot more natural, it sounds a lot more aggressive. By adjusting the release time, the compression will sound more natural. Using faster release times will generally give you more aggressive compression and can sometimes lead to pumping depending on what the source material is. So to summarize, a slower attack means more impact, more articulation from the source sound. Whereas with fast release, it sounds more aggressive and you get more perceived volume. Where with a slower release time, it's more smooth and more natural. Next, we're going to look at how the ratio affects the signal. So I've made some examples here. On each one of these, there's 10 dB of gain reduction taking place, but I've used a ratio ranging from 2 to 1, 3 to 1, 4 to 1, 5 to 1, as you can see them labelled, going all the way up to 10 to 1, then infinite. I've normalised all these files so we can hear and see the difference. Even though there's the same amount of gain reduction taking place, by changing the ratio, we can see how the compressor responds differently.
Never let go of you. 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 Never let go of you.
If we compare the ratio of 2 to 1 to 100 to 1, by putting them side by side, even though there's the same amount of gain reduction taking place, the waveforms look very, very different. As you can see, the one below, you can see the top of the waveform has been squared off. A lot of the detail has been taken out of the audio, and the quieter sections have been brought up. So the higher the ratio, the more aggressive the compression is going to be. Compression can be used to tame dynamics, add punch, glue elements together in the mix, provide a sense of rhythmic movement, and to change the tonality of parts of a mix. On individual elements such as a snare drum, a compressor can act like a volume envelope, whereas a compressor also on things like vocals, guitar, it can even out amplitude differences between different notes. If a vocalist moves closer or away from the mic, it can even out the level. Next, we're going to look at the knee control. A soft knee rounds off the threshold point to make the transition to full compression softer, whereas a hard knee has the opposite effect. So we can think of the knee as setting the roundness of the compression around the threshold. Using a soft knee is more gradual and transparent, whereas a hard knee makes the compression more pronounced. A soft knee in combination with fast attack settings can also achieve saturation-like effects. So my tips for getting started with compression would be try out some of these different parameters on different sources of audio and see what difference they make. For instruments, I'd say a good attack time to start off with is around 40 milliseconds and a release time of 60 milliseconds if you're using it on an instrument or a synth. If you go below 10 milliseconds on instruments, generally that's when you really start to sacrifice the attack and the impact to the start of the note. With vocals and speech, you don't really want the transients there a lot of the time, so you can go with much faster attack times. If you're applying subtractive EQ to take out any unwanted frequencies, I would recommend doing that before the compressor. Otherwise, the compressor detection stage is going to be triggered by those frequencies that you aren't using. When trying to find the attack and release times that you want, sometimes setting the ratio and threshold higher than you'd want to exaggerate the compression so you can really hear what it's doing. Finding the attack and release times that seem to work best, and then dialing back the compression can be a good workaround. Also, use the makeup gain to compare before and after so that you're gain matching before and after the compression, so you're not fooling yourself into it sounding better or worse just because it's quieter or louder. Don't fall into the trap of just using compression for the sake of it. Always use it for a goal or a purpose you have in mind. Think of it as a tool to shape the tone and character of your audio, not just a way of evening out the level of a signal.